And this is Ken Kraetzer for Sons of the American Legion Radio. We have a special interview opportunity today. We're going to talk with Bob Beretta from West Point, who is a Senior Associate Athletic Director, focusing now on strategic initiatives, but has probably had every job in the athletic department over the last 33 years of dedicated service to West Point and the cadets. Bob, good to see you today. How you doing?
I'm great, Ken. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
My pleasure. Maybe we'll just start with a quick thought. How's the last month been? It's certainly been tough for closing down sports at West Point, and we talked to Jeff Munkin a couple of weeks ago about the uncertainty. But everybody's planning for keeping in touch with the athletes and the cadets. What's it been like for you the last 4 to 6 weeks?
Yeah, it's been surreal, Ken. It really has. I think it's forced us all to a new level of becoming IT experts, as we are here today via Zoom and some other telecommuting work that we've been conducting. But we've been trying to stay as in touch, as engaged with our student athletes and with our staff as possible. Obviously, the health, safety, and welfare of our student athletes are always first and foremost among all of our thoughts, but also our staff as well. We want to be as engaged with them. We're concerned about everyone's physical well-being, but also with everyone's mental well-being. So we've put in a number of different programs. Mike Buddy has done a great job in developing a program that keeps us engaged with our staff members on a multiple times during the course of the week. And of course, we're still trying to conduct business as best we can, so that hopefully when there is some sense of normalcy that returns to the world, we're able to hit the ground running and move forward and advance our enterprise.
Absolutely, and we look forward to the day that athletics can return and the cadets can be back training what they do at West Point so well. One of the things I just want to recognize your award you're going to receive. You were elected to the Hall of Fame for the College Sports Information Directors, CoSIDA, a group I've done work with over the years, and that will hopefully be presented in Las Vegas in June, and you'll have a plaque at the NCAA office in Indianapolis. That's quite nice recognition, and you're very well deserving of that, Bob.
Well, Ken, thank you so much, and quite honestly, it was overwhelming. I haven't been really in that world for a number of years, but I have such respect for the work that those people do, the time that they put in, the passion they bring, and I was really fortunate. I was part of a great team. We were able to build a phenomenal staff at West Point with really talented professionals and people that were passionate about what they were doing. We were all focused on one mission, and that was a mission of West Point, not an individual mission of any staff member in particular, or any athlete or any sports program. It was always West Point first, and we had great people. And I was fortunate to surround myself with some phenomenal people that made me look good as the person that oversaw the office for many years. But truly, they're the ones that deserve the recognition. I just happened to be the person in front of leading the charge in that office during those years. But we had some really phenomenally talented people that deserve recognition far more than I do.
Well, you've been involved in a lot of innovations in college sports, and really the role of sports information and public relations has changed so much in the span of our careers. I mean, we have to both admit we started before email, right?
Well before email. I'll tell you what, Ken, I remember, and I hate to admit this because I guess I'm getting old when you get an honor like you just mentioned. You must be old, right? So I tell people I started at West Point when I was 5, though, so that kind of counteracts that. But I remember the day that someone brought the whole concept of, it was the World Wide Web. It wasn't the internet at the time. And they said, we're going to have a meeting to discuss the World Wide Web. And I had no concept of what that could possibly mean 20 years later, and how our lives would be so moved by it, and how it'd be an impossibility to conduct business as we know it without the internet now, without being online every minute of every day. And of course, this pandemic has really shined a spotlight on that for us. But there's no question it is a changed industry from the years when we started telecopying materials, which was before the fax machine, right? When the fax machine came out, it was unbelievable technology. When we were telecopying a box score to a newspaper, it would take 20 minutes, and it would come over most times illegible, but that was what we had. And then the fax machine was great. It was a minute or a minute and a half to fax a box score. And now it's, you know, it's electronic, it's pop an email, and it's there instantaneously. So it has evolved tremendously over the years.
Well, you've done a lot, as you said, in implementing what we call digital marketing to West Point. I always tell people in the business world that the leaders in the field are in college athletics, because everyone is so aggressive about implementing technology as fast as possible to get the message out about their teams. And certainly smartphones took it to another level. How have you managed personally just to be able to keep up with the technology? Something I think we're all kind of working on in our careers. How have you been able to keep up with it?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Ken. And I think in this industry, you know, we have to evolve. We have to continue to reimagine ourselves. And I've been fortunate to do that at West Point in many different roles that I've had. So I've been able to adapt and keep a finger on the pulse and surround myself with great people. And if it was an innovation that I thought that we could implement into our organization, we were going to be on the cutting edge of that, or really I'm a collaborative type of a leader. So with my staff, we would meet every day. And if there was something new, an industry standard, a best practice that we could somehow incorporate into what we were doing on a daily basis, we wanted to explore that. We wanted to see if it made sense, if it made us more efficient. But I have always been very collaborative and always been very, have a very strong appetite to stay on the cutting edge, to stay on the forefront. As they say, if you're not advancing, you're falling behind or you're dying, right? So we don't want to die. We want to move forward, and we always want to be acclimated with the best in industry standards. We consider our experience what we want to provide to be an extraordinary experience for our cadet athletes, but I also feel that we want an extraordinary experience for our staff members. So we want to be excellent in everything that we do, and the only way to be an excellent in everything that we do is to stay on the cutting edge of all innovation, and that's very important to us.
Absolutely. And you've hired some really smart people, very capable at digital marketing and all the new technologies that we enjoy working with when we come up to West Point. I guess in your career, you've witnessed a lot of changes in college sports. Kind of like when I was in college, I was at Providence. There were a lot of schools that were independents, and then conferences started to form in the 80s. And Army has, for the most part, been an independent, but you did an experiment with Conference USA that was kind of a struggle. And now you've been dealing with conference realignment and decided to stay independent. Tell us a little bit about how working with conferences and your perception has been over the years.
No, that's a great question, Ken. And I think that I'll tell you an interesting story on how we decided to go into Conference USA. You know, and it's all about fit. When it come down to, we have programs that are in conferences and thriving in conferences, whether it be hockey and Atlantic Hockey Association, or our membership for the majority of our Olympic sport programs in the Patriot League. Those are great fits for our programs, and tremendous homes and great leadership and just really sound alignments. But we made a mistake, to be quite honest with you, when we joined Conference USA in football. It was a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction back in 1996. If you recall back into that year, we were 10-2 in football, had a phenomenal year. But that was right when all the conferences were beginning to align with the bowls. And, you know, before that, it was kind of the wild, wild west. You cut a backroom deal. You might have 3 bowl deals, and you'd go to a game and there'd be a lineup of bowl representatives, and you'd have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and you'd hope that everyone was living up to the word. And that all changed in the mid-90s. I think people got a little bit exhausted by that process. So they really started to lock in contacts and alignments with conferences. Well, in 96, we were 10-2. We were an independent, and there was only one at-large bid available at that point in time. Actually, I think we were undefeated going up to play Syracuse in November. We were 8-0, I believe, and we ended up the regular season at 10-1. But we went into that Navy game at 9-1, and I think Navy was 8-2. It was something like that. But there was one bid open, and the winner of that game was going to get the Independence Bowl bid, and the loser was going to go home. So as it turns out, we did win the game. And later that evening, based on a result in a different conference, another bid actually to the Aloha Bowl in Hawaii opened up. and Navy was able to get that bid. So we won the game, and we went to the Independence Bowl, and Navy lost the game and went to Hawaii. So that was always kind of a head scratcher. But we love Shreveport. We just did a deal with Missy Setters and those folks down there, and we're really excited about going down there. But my point is, I think our administration got really concerned. We were having this phenomenal season, and had we lost that game, there was a strong chance that we weren't going to go to a bowl game, and people, got a little bit concerned about our pathway to a bowl game moving forward. If it looked like, hey, if you weren't in the conference, you weren't going to be to go in a bowl game. That, on top of that, there was just a better voice in the NCAA if you were a part of a conference as opposed to being an independent. So we looked at all those things, and the leadership at that time felt, hey, we have this opportunity going to this burgeoning conference, Conference USA. It's a great name. Let's go there. A bunch of schools that we feel like we can be competitive against. Well, unfortunately, that conference really didn't align well with our values, with our mission and values, our core principles as an institution. And from a football standpoint, it was an up-and-coming conference. No one in the country, I don't think, really knew how talented the players were in that conference. There were a lot of players that from all over the country that maybe didn't get into an Auburn, but they made it into UAB academically, or maybe didn't get into Mississippi State, but they ended up at Southern Miss. And it was those types of players week in and week out. Plus, at the time, we went through a coaching change. We changed our offensive philosophy. So we went to a spread offense. And, most of the teams in that conference ran that spread. So people were used to seeing it against athletes that, quite honestly, were a cut above the athletes we were able to bring in at that time. And that conference really attacked our weaknesses from a speed standpoint. It really, that is always, with the Service Academy, speed has always been a concern, and you want to recruit to that. And we've done a phenomenal job under Jeff Monken, as has Navy, under Coach Niumatalolo, really elevating the speed levels of both programs. But back then, we were a notch below that, and we struggled. We struggled for 7 years, and it really set our program back probably 10 to 15 years. It was a tough decision. We learned the hard way, and we ended up getting out after 7 years. But again, it took us a few more years to gain our footing and realign our scheduling to the point where we are now, and we're really comfortable being an independent. I think the only thing that really threatens our independence is being able to schedule games against teams that in those months of October and November. Most of the conferences block those out. I've been fortunate enough to handle our scheduling since 2005. And the first thing that I do when I work on a year is to try and get those October, November games. But we're blessed. We're fortunate right now. We're scheduled all the way through 2029. So I don't see that as a threat to our independence. I believe we're going to be able to stay put. It's one of the things I've been working on during this period of shelter in place at home is really spend a lot of time making some phone calls and working on some schedules. And we got some games scheduled through 2033 during the last couple of weeks. And we're pretty much fully scheduled through 2029 at this time.
I'm looking forward to going up and covering that 2033 game with you.
Well, you might have to tell me about it. I don't know that I'll still be at West Point, but yeah, we're pretty excited about a couple of games that we were able to lock in here over the past 6 or 8 weeks.
Hey, one of the things that you've been involved with is the tremendous improvements in the physical plant in athletics at West Point. I enjoy going to the Hoffman press box for games. I can't tell you how much I value that opportunity every game day. The Kinney Center, the Foley Center, the facilities new for lacrosse and for sprint football. We have a friend, one of our contributors was a former sprint football player, Sam Houston. And tell us a little bit about some of the projects improving the infrastructure that really led to the growth of West Point athletics that we've seen prosper so much in recent years.
Yeah, well, first of all, Ken, I'd like to thank you. As much as you love coming to West Point, we love having you there, and you do such a great job covering our athletic program and really telling the story of our cadet athletes. So thank you for that. You've been there for a long, long period of time, and you're one of the folks that we love to have around. And with that in mind, we want to service our media better, but we want to service our cadet athletes better. So I really give Rick Greenspan a tremendous amount of credit. Back then it was Rick Greenspan, and General Chrisman was our superintendent. And we had relied on federal government dollars for many, many years for our facilities projects. And we'd fallen behind, quite honestly. I'd say we were in the bottom echelon of Division I in terms of our athletic facilities. And we put a plan together, a master plan, a long-range plan, and really started to go out and look for private support for our athletic programs, for our athletic facilities. We knew that we couldn't just rely on government dollars. We needed to make a change in our business plan. And we did that beginning around 2000. And I think we pumped about, $80 to $90 million into athletic facilities over that period of time. And the great majority of it was private donations. Everything, as you mentioned, the Hoffman press box. I'm sure you remember the years we didn't have an elevator there. We had to carry everything up those stairs from the ground up, whether it be copy machines or all of our equipment on game day. So that was terrible. We had a very shoddy workspace for our media members. In fact, in '96, when we had a record-breaking year and we had national media at one of our games, and it was a monsoon outside. It was a remnants of a hurricane, and I think it was more wet. It was wetter inside the press box than it was outside, and we had some national media members there, Ivan Maisel and some other folks. And they were, their laptops back then, they were getting wet from the dripping. So, that certainly helped us to get to the new press box. But we spent about $6 or $7 million on the press box. We spent $40 million plus on the Kimsey Athletic Center to provide our football program with a new home, a new strength and conditioning center for our athletes. The Foley Center, the Fenn now, the Foley Enders Lathe Lacrosse Center right around Mikey Stadium. All these things have really elevated to the point where a couple of years ago, the Princeton Review ranked our athletic facilities as number one in the country, which is amazing for a service academy. And in this ever-changing day of a facilities arms race, I wouldn't say we're still number one, but we're certainly in the top percentage. And along those lines, we have a great project that we're starting to fundraise for, and it's going to transform Mikey Stadium as we know it today into a facility for the next century. Really, it's going to be phenomenal once we get that built, and hopefully within the next 2 to 3 years we'll have a brand new east side of the stands of Mikey Stadium, and we're going to transform that into a phenomenal facility that is going to be well representing our academy, and certainly a great home for our fans to come and enjoy football, and the Corps of Cadets as well to watch their team play.
Well, we'll look forward to that. And really, I always say the facilities at West Point for athletics aren't a par with an NFL team, just great to see. Hey, one of the things that the relationships that you've managed to cultivate is with the New York Yankees, and you set up a couple of Army football games at Yankee Stadium, the memorable first opening college football game against Notre Dame. What a wonderful night that was. And then the visit of the Yankee team to West Point in 2013. You always arrange great weather for these events, and It was a nice day, a little cool, but I remember, saw all the Yankee players, talked with Joe Girardi and all of the others. Mariano Rivera threw out the first pitch that day, tell us a little bit about the relationship that you've been able to grow. It still continues. West Point cadets go down and present a flag on opening day, and at playoff games, West Point bands goes down there. Tell us about that.
Well, it's a great relationship, Ken. It really is. And it began with Mr. Steinbrenner's great passion for the military and great respect. And there had always been a tremendous linkage there between the academy itself and West Point and the New York Yankees. As you know, Army football has a long and storied tradition of playing at Yankee Stadium back in the 40s and 30s with Army Notre Dame games and things of that nature. And then, of course, the baseball relationship was one that I grew up in the Hudson Valley. I went to Marlboro High School here, and my dad was a huge baseball fan, as I was, but my dad was not a huge fan of going to New York City. So every year I recalled getting pulled out of school one day a year in April early to go down to West Point. And that was our one trip to watch a New York City baseball team, because he wouldn't go into the city. But we'd go to West Point. And back then, every year there was an exhibition game. It would be the Mets one year and the Yankees the other. The teams would alternate. And that changed, that changed in the 80s with the proliferation of the union getting involved. And it was always when the season started and it would be an off day, Well, the union stepped in and said to the major league teams, "You're not going to force our players to take a day off and play an exhibition game." So the tradition really died in the late 80s. It was something that I always remembered and really longed for and dreamed of maybe someday we could bring the Yankees back. And it evolved over time. I think our relationship with the Yankees began again in earnest back in with Kevin Anderson as the athletic director, and we engaged with the Yankees about playing some football games there. We played, as you mentioned, Ken, the first football game at the new Yankee Stadium against Notre Dame. That was Notre Dame's home game as part of their Shamrock Series, and it was such an unbelievable event to just plan that. It was, from an operational standpoint, the first for the Yankees to play football there, but also Army and Notre Dame moving there. So all three were experiencing it first. And then, of course, we did sign a deal and played multiple games there as our home team. So we moved several of our home games, and I was fortunate enough to kind of run lead on all those events down there. But as the relationship grew, we really wanted to visit baseball. And we talked about that when we did the contract with them about playing a baseball game down at Yankee Stadium. We move ahead a couple of years, and the Yankees AAA farm system is in Scranton, and they had a major renovation at, I think, PNC Park a couple of years back. And so based on discussions we were having with Brian Cashman and Lon Trost and some of the leadership, and they came up and looked at Doubleday Field potentially as a place where they would play a portion of their schedule while PNC was closed. So we were talking, and we had visits. Brian Cashman came up, spent the day with us. We walked through the facility and talked through some things. It never came to fruition because I believe at the time the Mets invoked their territorial rights and did not allow the Yankees within that footprint. I think, both teams have that geographic footprint that they can block out for if a competitor comes within the range. And so they exercised that, and we never did host the Yankees for that summer. But we did start talking about, hey, how about maybe could we? And sure enough, within 2 years, Brian went back, Mr. Cashman went back to the Steinbrenners, and they were very much in favor of that. Of course, Mr. Steinbrenner had always been a huge fan of West Point. In fact, when he was ill, one of the last years we went down there with the baseball team, and we presented him with a cadet saber for everything, his support. For many years, the Yankees hosted the Army baseball team during its spring down in Tampa, down at the training facility, and we'd work out down there. So one of the last years, we went up to Mr. Steinbrenner's box at one of the spring games and presented him with our captains. We walked into his box and presented him with a saber, which Hal Steinbrenner had told me when they came to play at West Point was still on Mr. Steinbrenner's desk. It was one of his most treasured possessions. So we were able to talk to the Yankees. It worked out to come up and play an exhibition game. And the way it worked was, instead of being an in-season game, they were scheduled to play 2 games at Nationals Park at the end of spring training. And then they were going to open up their season at home a day later. So rather than play that second game at Nationals Park, they were able to kind of get out of that game, took the train up to West Point, up to New York that Friday. We played on Saturday. Yeah. They came up Saturday morning. We toured them around West Point. We broke the team into 2 groups. We had not competing, but we had parallel tours going on. It was phenomenal. The players, they ate in the mess hall like they did back in the 80s and 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then we had a day where we had batting practice on the field, so we had some fans on the field to enjoy that. We brought in temporary stands, over 5,000, and Boo Corrigan was the athletic director at the time. And when I told him kind of what we wanted to do and bring in the bleachers, we told him what the price tag, because bringing in temporary bleachers is phenomenally expensive. It's incredible. It was over $300,000 in cost just to bring in the bleachers. And he looked at me and said, "All right, you better make sure we sell this game out to cover our cost, or else you'll be looking you better make some contact with the Yankees, because you might be looking for a job." But I said, "Boo, we'll sell this game out in minutes," and we did. It sold out very quickly. It was a great day. It was so memorable, and to this day, I remember Mariano Rivera, walking with him in the cadet chapel, and he was taking video of the chapel. He was going to build a church back in Panama, and he took a bunch of video of that, and he was so moved. I remember speaking to Brett Gardner at the time, and they really enjoyed their visit. They enjoyed the experience. We made a great relationship. We made great relationships with the players, but also with the front office, the Steinbrenners, Jennifer Steinbrenner, Hal Steinbrenner, all in attendance. Mr. Levine, Randy was very integral in the planning. Obviously, Brian Cashman, all those folks were there. And we made a great friend in Joe Girardi, who's been just a dear friend over the years since that period of time, so supportive. And, now he's forced me to be a Phillies fan because he's the manager down there. And we spent some time with him at Army Navy this year. But, we were going to play down in Philadelphia before the pandemic hit. The baseball team was going to play Navy down at Citizens Bank. So we had gone through all the planning for that game and been down there several times. And we were really looking forward to that before the pandemic hit. But a long answer to your question, it's been, it was probably one of my most memorable experiences here at West Point was being able to bring a game like that, having a small part in bringing that game back to West Point after, for me, it was such a big part of my childhood.
Well, what I also remember about that day was how much the military families who were able to attend that game enjoyed it. The children of the officers and instructors at West Point were all out there. You had a young child do a first pitch in honor of all the military children, and really that was such a great day and great memory for everybody who was there. Now, you've had a lot of big days at West Point, and I've been fortunate to be at quite a few of them over the last 10 or so years. And one of them I took my dad to. I have to say, we were talking about it before we started, was in the 90s at the Meadowlands. You played Notre Dame, full house. Lou Holtz had to sit in the press box because he was sick that year. And Notre Dame got out to a big lead. But in the fourth quarter, Army scored 3 touchdowns to trail by a point with the extra point conversion yet to go. And Army went for the 2-pointer. And they called the $7 million tackle. Looked like Army was going to score on that. And a Notre Dame safety came up, made the play, at the flag. You told me you had a great view of that play.
Yeah, I really did, Ken. And that was a phenomenal year. 95, we had a great team in 96 who went to the Independence Bowl. But I almost feel like our 95 team might have been more talented. And we finished right at 500, but we had so many games decided by 10 points or less, actually by 5 points or less. And that was one of those games. That Notre Dame game was one of those games. It was we fell behind early. You mentioned Lou Holtz. I think he'd been in a car accident. I think he was coaching from the press box. He had a halo on. He had a neck injury at the time, and they couldn't stop the option. We fell behind early, and then we just started shredding them. And we had moved Ron Thomas, who had been an outstanding split end for us. We had moved him in the backfield that year, and we just kept pitching the ball around. And Ron there were huge holes, and he just shredded their defense. And we came back from a big deficit and had the opportunity to tie the game at that point in time. And Bob Sutton was our head coach, and Bob Sutton decided, you know what, we're not going to, and I believe that was before overtime, so the game would have probably ended in a tie. But Bob decided, hey, we're the United States Army. We're going to try to win this game. We're not going to play for a tie, and I gave him a tremendous amount of credit for that. So, yeah, we ran a pass play right in front. I was standing on the sideline at that time. It was kind of an out pattern to our tight end, Ron Lashinsky, and Ron was an outstanding player. Excuse me, back then our quarterback was Ronnie Makeda, and Lashinsky was a tight end. And so we threw a ball to Lashinsky, and he got stopped literally at about probably the half-yard line, about a foot and a half away. And a defensive back named Ivory Covington from Notre Dame, who was outweighed tremendously, just kind of shoved Ron out. And I remember people talking about that play and saying Ivory Covington, he's so underweighted, but in terms of his weight, and gave away so many pounds to Lashinsky. But Ron was moving east and west at the time. He wasn't moving north and south. He was running an out pattern, caught the ball. He was headed towards the sideline, and I was feet away from where he got shoved out of bounds. Ivory Covington came up and just kind of used his momentum against him and shoved him right out of bounds at about the half-yard line, and that was it. So while we lost the game, I think we won a lot of the hearts of the great American public for our effort, but also our decision to try to win the game as opposed to playing for the tie.
Absolutely. Well, there was kind of a long, kind of a difficult period you described earlier, but in 2010, under Rich Ellerson as coach, the team became very competitive, won a lot of games on the road that year, and found itself in a bowl game down in Texas. I couldn't go because of a snowstorm that year.
Yeah.
But you played a terrific game down at SMU against SMU on their field at their stadium. And that was the Steve Anderson team, Trent Steelman. Tell us a little bit about how good it must have been to go and win a bowl game.
Yeah, I think, Ken, that had always been one of my biggest disappointments in that we were able to accomplish so many great things at West Point. We weren't able to turn the football program around for all those years. So when we brought Rich Ellerson into the program, we felt really confident that he was the right man at the right time. And I think 2 years later, he put us in position to go to a bowl game for the first time since 1996. We went to the Armed Forces Bowl down in Fort Worth. That year, as you mentioned, the game was played at SMU because TCU's stadium was under construction. We went to the Armed Forces Bowl, played in SMU Stadium against SMU before a record crowd at Ford Stadium. It was the largest college football crowd ever in that stadium. I believe that record still holds. And what a phenomenal game. It came down to the last possession, and we found a way to win. And that was a gritty team with Steve Anderson and Steelman and some really talented young people. But I think the euphoria of that season culminated that day with that victory. And there were so many Army fans down there, and we felt like, hey, we're finally back. We're finally back. We were really, borderline on being just a non-factor on the college football stage. We were irrelevant for so many years. And when you don't play in a bowl game in December, you feel irrelevant, when you're out there. So that we garnered an awful lot of attention. That team deserved it and really brought us back. We stepped back the next couple of years, but I think it really set the country. I noticed that Army was going to be back. And then, of course, we brought Jeff Monken into the program, went on that terrific run of 3 straight bowl games. And I think we're really positioned for tremendous success moving forward again. I think that when we brought in Jeff Monken, we felt like we had the right person. But we struggled those first couple of years. He was changing a program, changing a culture, bringing in a different talent level. And so we did struggle. But while our one-loss record in 2015 wasn't what we would have liked, we felt like the foundation was being built. And it really, I think in 16, that season opening win over Temple provided the confidence that had that positive reinforcement. Okay, it was okay. Now we're there. We knew Temple was a up and coming program with a phenomenal coaching staff, and we went down to the link and won down there. And I think shocked a lot of people. And then the confidence started to build, and we started to roll. And of course, it culminated with a season-ending win over North Texas at the Cotton Bowl in the heart of Dallas. A beautiful game, a beautiful weather day. I think it was 75 degrees in Dallas in December, and that really set the stage for a 3-year run and of postseason accomplishments. We went to the Armed Forces Bowl again the following year against San Diego State and won in a riveting game, and then just took Houston apart in 18 in the Armed Forces Bowl. So again, a step back last year, I think that a number of different reasons, but you look back at 16, I think in history will tell us that 16 and 15, really the years that really put this program back in the right direction. And again, I believe that this program is positioned very, very well for many postseason games to come in the near future.
Got to ask you about finally beating Navy, that euphoric game down in Baltimore. For someone who had been with the program as you have for many years, that must have been an incredible moment. I had tremendous butterflies in my stomach the last few minutes of the game, to see if you guys, could pull out the game, hold on to it, and break the streak. And tell us about what that day was like for you.
Yeah, 14 years is a long time, and losing to your rival and going to meetings and planning games. And, there were some years where there didn't seem like there was light at the end of the tunnel. And we went into those games without much hope. And so as the streak started to come to an end, we were close many of those years. Those last couple of years that we lost, it's like we just found ways to lose those games. And I think it was just a confidence factor more than anything else. And Navy had tremendous confidence. They believed that they would find a way to win. And we just kept finding ways to lose, to be honest with you. And we needed to change that culture. And Coach Munkin, Jeff came in and changed that culture. And when we finally won that game and snapped the 14-year streak, it was euphoric. I think that's the only word that can use that can accurately describe that. And we had tremendous talent. You know, Ahmad Bradshaw was just a warrior at quarterback. And, you know, he was so durable, so talented, and just the perfect person to guide that offense. And, you know, the scene on the field that day, to have the core rush the field, and I was on the field, and you know, you're worried for your safety, to be quite honest with you. I have a daughter now. She's a junior at Sacred Heart University, but I looked around and she was on the field, and I asked her, how the heck did you get on the field? Because she never comes on the field. We never have her on the field, but you know, people were just jumping the guardrails and wanted to be part of it. And it was an amazing day. I was so ecstatic, not only for our players, but for our coaches and for our academy and for our graduates. They're the ones that have lived through the pain of 14 years. So to see all that spill over onto the field and that celebration, it was a once in a lifetime experience. No question about that.
You know, afterwards, I was outside the Army locker room and the door was open. So we were kind of listening in to the speeches being made by the Secretary of the Army and the superintendent. And I look over my shoulder, and who's standing next to me but General Dawkins, Pete Dawkins, listening. And I asked him, you know, was it like this for you in his years? And he just smiled.
Yeah, there really is nothing like a victory over your arch rival, and that type of series. It's amazing. But to end a streak of 14 years, I think back on it now, and it's amazing, because that series had always been very closely contested. And you look at back in the 90s, I think there was a 6-year stretch, or was it a 5-year stretch? I think it was 5 wins in a row for Army by a total of 10 points. And I remember thinking back during that time, and I was saying, boy, you know what? History has a tendency to somehow balance and level things off. And if this is, hopefully we're not going to be on the wrong side of this. And it came back with a vengeance by losing 14 straight. But yeah, that victory was certainly a highlight for all that were in attendance that day. And
just talking with Bob Beretta, maybe we'll just wrap up by talking about some of the great people that you've worked with at West Point. We start with some of the superintendents, because I go back to General Chrisman, who was very nice to my father. Would always come up to say hello to my dad, who was a World War II veteran, when we'd come up to some of the events. Certainly General Caslin, now General Williams. What's it been like to work with the superintendents and all the VIPs from the Army who come to West Point all the time, it seems?
It's been an honor, and to be honest with you, it's quite humbling to be associated with some of the leaders that you just mentioned, whether it be General Chrisman, some of our superintendents, General Caslin, who's now the president at South Carolina, General Lennox was one of our superintendents, went on to become the president at St. Leo, and now is in a consulting firm. And just tremendous leaders. I've been able to study and walk alongside some of the top military minds in the country, some of the top leaders, and it's been a great experience for me. Some phenomenal leaders in our athletic department. I mentioned Kevin Anderson and Boo Corrigan, and you know, Mr. Ulrich, Carl Ulrich, who hired me, and he's the one who hired Jim Young back in the 80s. I'm forever indebted to Carl Ulrich, who hired me as an intern back in 1987. So it's been a blessing. And then some of the people that I've been fortunate enough to work with alongside, whether it be Maddie Salvani, who's been kind of my partner in crime Maddie's been there since the 60s. She's been there over 50 years, and she's a volunteer now. And she works more now and harder and longer hours now than she ever did. But there's so many times we spent together in late nights in the office over the years. And, you know, Bob Kinney, my predecessor as the sports information director. And then I've been able to move forward and do some other things in different areas and work closely with other members of our department, but other leaders around the country. So it really has been a phenomenal experience for me, the world's premier leadership institution, and to walk alongside some of those minds every day. And has been so rewarding. And I think, you know, when you know you're really getting old is when there's so many. Before it was some of the players that I used to know that would come back and work. Now it's the players' sons or daughters, like Connor Slomka, who just signed a free agent contract with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Of course, his dad was Jim Slomka and played a great defensive tackle for us back in the 90s. That's when you know you're getting old. But it's been rewarding, to say the least.
Hey, got to mention just quickly about women's sports growth at West Point. And one of the the players really stood out for us was in basketball, Kelsey Minato.
Yeah.
A phenomenal career she had, took West Point to 2 NCAA tournaments. We got to the one game down in Maryland in the NCAA tournament. And I remember Gerald Dempsey was sitting right a couple rows behind me at the game. And what a neat day. Tell us a little bit about the growth of women's sports at West Point.
Yeah, and of course, Maddie. I mentioned Maddie, and she deserves a lot of the credit for bringing women's sports to the forefront at West Point, at least from a publicity standpoint. But it is a huge part of our program. As you know, we have a great offering of women's sports. We recently added women's lacrosse and women's rugby over the last 5 years, and both are doing exceptionally well. And you mentioned some athletes like Kelsey Minato. Kelsey is a once in a lifetime, and she was amazing. We retired her number, and what a special night that was. She didn't know we were going to retire it, but her last home game. But she was talented. I mean, she was a pass and catch, and you throw her the ball, it'd go up, and it ended up down the bottom of the net. She was the equivalent to Kevin Houston on the men's side, is what Kelsey Minato was on the women's side. And we've had athletes that are elite. You know, we have some in our program right now. We have Sam Sullivan, a women's rugby player who was basically named the top 15s player a couple of years ago, the equivalent of the Heisman. And we have a young lady in our track program, Callie McMullen, who's one of the premier sprinters in the country. She's going to graduate as the premier sprinter in all of Service Academy history, which is Army, Navy, and Air Force, just phenomenal. We have really talented softball players. I was fortunate enough last year to serve as the softball coach in an intern basis, and made some phenomenal relationships, and really got to spend a year with female athletes in terms of what they go through. And I have had tremendous respect before that, but gained even more insight and really applaud their efforts at West Point. And they have a special place in my heart, and the female athletes have a special place at the academy. And we're so fortunate to have some of the representatives that we do wearing black, gold, and gray for us.
Absolutely. And Bob Beretta is elected to the Hall of Fame for the Sports Information Directors Association. Will be inducted at a ceremony, hopefully out in Las Vegas in June. And but we've appreciated, you got me back into this by one day when we asked you, you called in to do an interview on WVOX, and at the end of it, you said, "Oh, if you're coming up to the game, come in and sit in the post-game press conference with the coach." And I would say, my answer to that was, I haven't missed one since.
Well, we're really fortunate to have you, and can't thank you enough for the hard work that you do, Ken. And you go on the road with us, and you're there telling our story and the story of our cadet athletes, and that is a tremendous service to our nation. So thank you.
No, I appreciate that. And I always say my dad, and my uncle, who was both World War II veterans, are always with me when I'm up at West Point. And would enjoy so much talking with the cadets there. Final thought for us today, Bob?
Well, Ken, I can't thank you enough for what you've done, but I hope that everyone is staying safe, and your families are safe and healthy, and we'll return to normalcy. It may be a little bit different than what we're all used to, but that day is coming. It's fast approaching, but take care of your families, give them all a hug and tell them you love them, and we know that how special every moment is. I know our athletes are going to go into their next season with much more appreciation for every time they step on that friendly field of strife, and we can't wait to get them back out there and represent the United States Military Academy.
Well, we look forward to that, and our best wishes to your family and everybody at West Point and in the U.S. military. And great to chat with you today. Bob Beretta has been over 30 years at West Point, elected to the Hall of Fame for the Sports Information Directors Association. Great to chat with you today. And so this is Ken Kraetzer for Sons of the American Legion Radio, representing the 350,000 members of the Sons, serving America's veterans and the 2 million veterans who are part of the American Legion. Bob, great to see you today. We'll see you again very soon at West Point. So for Sons
my pleasure. My pleasure. And thank you to the service of all your listeners and viewers. We can't thank you enough for all your service over the years, and you inspire us on a daily basis. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. We appreciate representing the veterans and the members of the American Legion family so much when we're at West Point. Bob, thanks again. And so, on behalf of the Sons of American Legion Radio, this is Ken Kraetzer.